So we know what we're talking about when we mention conspiracy theories and the conspiracy mentality. Should we be concerned? Now, in the previous section, I mentioned that intersection between MAGA supporters in the US and QAnon, and how this helped fuel the January 6th insurrection. From this, we might suppose that conspiracy theories are bad for democracy. The truth is actually a little bit more complicated. There are two sides to this argument. The first is pretty simple. There isn't anything particularly unique about the current frenzy around conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories have always been with us. They seem to be a standard part of democracy. One of the virtues of being a democratic citizen is having skepticism about the government, right? You don't blindly trust the government, and this is a way of keeping the government honest. So if you look at the work of, say, Michael Butter, he says conspiracy theories have a long-standing relationship with democracy. It might literally just be part of the package. Indeed, it has been claimed by Murto Pantazzi, Kostas Papianou, and Jan Wilhelm von Prugen that conspiracy theorists often support the greater democratization of the political system. Their cynicism about politics is rooted in a distrust of elected representatives and a system that seems to take power out of the hands of the people. Their beef isn't with democracy per se, it's about the corruption of democracy. This also reveals a conceptual affinity between conspiracy theory and populism, with its suspicion of elites. Populism is premised on the idea that there is a corrupt elite who have stolen government from the people, and that is exactly the same claim that conspiracy theorists tend to make in democracies. Now, these scholars, confusingly, have also made the claim that conspiracy theorists are inclined to authoritarianism. This is because they view authoritarian strongmen as the best vehicle to clean out conspirators who are undermining the public good. This seems contradictory, but it's not necessarily contradictory. Think about how people support authoritarian strongmen as the voice of the people, right? The voice of real Americans who will clear out corruption in the capital. There is a certain disdain for checks and balances. They view these as mechanisms by which hidden elites can check the will of the people. So in order to restore democracy, you have to tear down all of those checks and balances in order to expose the hidden conspirators that are checking the will of all people. Just think about the discourse that surrounds Donald Trump, right? He talks about cleaning out the swamp or draining the swamp.
We are going to Washington, D.C., and we are going to drain the swamp.
This is a common trend in conspiracy thought and in populism. Now, complementing this line of thought is the argument that conspiracy theories and the mentality simply something we shouldn't be worried about because they are fundamentally democratic. Will Mittendorf has made the case that conspiracy theories have an intrinsic commitment to democracy. This is because of their internal epistemic norms, right? They don't buy that there are some epistemic authorities who have privilege over everyone. They are committed to exposing the truth, right? They don't have an agenda the way that the mainstream media does. And according to Mittendorf, this makes them key parts of the democratic, immune system, right? As soon as conspiracy theorists start ringing their bells, that can be the first stage of an actual conspiracy being revealed. Now, do we buy this claim? I don't think so. I mean, it might describe some conspiracy thought, but when we look at the spreading of the conspiracy mentality, we see that it is turning into a closed system. I don't believe that they have this open commitment to the truth. They have an open commitment to their understanding of the truth, which relies on its own internal codes of logic, or indeed, when we talk about the new conspiracism, doesn't have any rationality at all. This is what we mean when we talk about echo chambers, for example. Echo chambers are closed systems. Conspiracy theories are becoming like that. At least that's my take on it. More people agree with me than agree with the people we just talked about. Most people think that conspiracy theories are harming democracy. Now, we can carve out the harm that conspiracy theories pose to democratic institutions into several distinct categories. The first is that the conspiracy mentality is highly corrosive to political partisanship. A lot of people think of partisanship as a bad thing, right? If you look at Parliament, there'll often be someone saying, oh, this is just partisan politics. But one of the founding principles of democracy is this idea of partisanship, which means that you contest power. but that it means your opponent is also not your enemy. This is what informs the idea of a loyal opposition. The opposition can disagree with the government, but they are still part of the same system. Now, with conspiracy theory, especially in its new form, disagreement isn't a sign of honest departure. It is a sign of either being part of the plot or being a dupe. And in either case, you are dangerous and you need to get pushed aside. More concerningly, it's not even the tool of the political loser. One would expect that those who lose elections reach for conspiracy theories to explain why they are not winning. We see this, I'm not going to say we don't see this. Just look at the Stop the Steal movement in the United States. But what's really interesting about recent conspiracy theory in democracy is that winners are also reaching for it. Throughout the Trump administration, there were complaints that Trump was being stifled by the deep state. In the UK, the Tory government constantly blamed the European Union for frustrating its policies. And when they left the EU, suddenly it became the blob of the civil service and lefty lawyers. Any sort of principled opposition becomes infected with the taint of conspiracy thought. So for example, the suggestion that immigration lawyers who are representing their clients to help facilitate their getting access to help are seen as being part of the great replacement conspiracy of displacing white Europeans with largely people from the Muslim world. This is how conspiracy theory undermines legitimate disagreement, which is a foundational part of democracy. The second way that conspiracy theory undermines democracy is by attacking epistemological authorities in society and eroding the shared basis of social life. Since the election of Donald Trump, a lot has been said about the post-truth era. Oftentimes people will say nothing matters. Nothing matters when the President of the United States can tell bald-faced lies and engage in conspiracy thought from the Oval Office. This has helped to facilitate a general disdain for authorities, such as scientists, epidemiologists, climate researchers, historians, and especially the free press. Any group that contests the assumptions of the conspiracy theorist is not to be trusted. Now, this is more than just saying, for example, I don't trust the research that comes out of the Cato Institute, for example, because it is highly partisan. Rather, it reflects a general distrust of all epistemological authorities. A single conspiracy theory doesn't undermine social epistemology, but when conspiracy mentality proliferates across society, it has a fundamentally corrosive effect. No one is willing to listen to evidence that contradicts their pre-existing beliefs. This destroys the shared basis for society, and it has been amped up in the digital age. Prior to the revolutionary triad of high-speed internet, the smartphone, and social media, conspiracy theories were actually hard to get at. You had to go to fringe events like in the States, you can go to a gun show where you can buy firearms without really doing a lot of security checks. Well, back in the day, you might get some conspiracy material under the table from right-wing militias. But today, all you have to do is pick up your phone, and you can dive deep into the world of conspiracy theories. Believe me, I've been doing it for the past week. This is a major driver in the success of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which germinated on 4chan, but then jumped ship onto people's Facebook feeds. Once you get a lot of people looking at Facebook, seeing QAnon stuff, especially if they're baby boomers, no offense to baby boomers, you get the conditions in which conspiracy theories spread. Even more problematic is that you don't even have to subscribe to a particular conspiracy theory like QAnon. The spread of this across social media creates a fertile ground for the conspiracy mentality to take root. It normalizes the way to approach social and political problems, and democracy seems particularly vulnerable to this. So you might say, yeah, of course, I think birds are real. I don't think Mothman did 9/11. I don't think Kennedy's head exploded. But once people start naturalizing that idea that a conspiracy can be around the corner, well, as soon as you hit one that sort of tickles your brain in the right way, you might start thinking, yeah, I do believe that the election was stolen. Or maybe there is a one-world conspiracy. Conspiracism hijacks that skepticism I was talking about earlier in democracy. We should be skeptical of our government, but when our default approach is skepticism and is almost nihilistic doubt that doesn't rest on any evidence, democracy and civil society becomes imperiled. Conspiracy thought and mentality undermine the civic bonds that are necessary for democracy to work. It undermines healthy partisanship, In democracy, we talk often about the loser's consent. Democracies can only function when the losing side agrees that it lost, and often this requires compromise. But it is part of democracy that keeps the rules in play. Conspiracy thought removes not only the loser's consent, but also the winner's consent. Even in victory, claims of being undermined proliferate. There is no social peace. The undermining of epistemological authorities is corrosive on many levels. It undermines the legitimacy of institutions like the university or the civil service and our shared social reality. Now, a lot of us think about our social world as being natural. It's not. We make our social world, and we all have to agree on its terms and conditions. The authority of law, for example, rests on our shared belief in its power. When people doubt that law has authority, it simply disappears. This was a key idea in John Austin's philosophy of law. The sovereign doesn't just rule with force, it also rules for habitual obedience. Conspiracy mentality short-circuits that habitual obedience and can lead to things like January 6. Democracy needs a certain amount of agreement to function. We have to agree on the rules of the game, even if we have differing partisan commitments. Conspiracism threatens this by insinuating without evidence that the game is rigged. It just asserts that it's true. You have to believe me. So what is to be done? People who support democracy point to the importance of preventing the conditions of conspiracy mentality taking root. We can identify many drivers. When people feel that the political system isn't working for them, when they face major anxiety, if people don't have secure jobs. Contemporary research has also focused on the real importance of digital literacy. Teaching people how to interact with the internet, assuming the internet is not in fact controlled by bots and is totally fake, is a way to prevent the spread of conspiracy thought. One of the reasons why I sort of poke fun at baby boomers is because they lack fundamental digital literacy. They'll believe memes that are shared on the internet very easily. This is why we have to teach digital literacy in school.
Let's start with web pages. So first you need to know that everything on the internet has an address, and all web addresses start with http://.
The claim here is fairly straightforward. Democracy requires stable background conditions to function. Conspiracy theories and mentality appear and take root when these background conditions fail. However, we may want to ask whether conspiracy theories actually reveal a deeper systemic problem in democracies, that democracy has a stupidity problem.